welcome back. Here we are to continue our look at React and practice our React programming and JavaScript skills. In the previous video, we talked about making this counter component, and we added some state to the counter. And clicking on the button increases the count, right? And the challenge at the end of the last video was to make the decrement button work, right? So this should subtract 1 from state and then update the counter. So let's do it the wrong way first. I'm going to say click equals, and what I'm going to do is write a function in here. So I'm going to add an on click to the second button. That's the minus button right here. And then in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type count -1, right? Or even you could do count minus equals 1, right? And when I do this, if I refresh here and I click minus, like nothing happens. Actually, I already get an error, right? Assigned to read-only property, right? So just changing the value for count isn't good enough, right? We have to call the setter function, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to call setCount and then do count -1, okay? Oh, I guess I have an extra space there. I was wondering why that didn't align. There we go, right? Okay, so we're going to make a function here, and we're going to call setCount and then provide the value, okay? So now let's give it a try. Oh, -1 seems to be working, +1, -1. And notice both counters can have their own value, okay? Okay, great. Let's move on to our next step, right? So the next step here is, what we have here kind of works, but what if we had a situation where we needed to show the total from all counts? So we need to share the data that's in each counter with another component. So this area right here is separate from these components, right? And we need to get the value. We need to pull out the value or extract the value from this component, this one, and add them all up to show the total, right? So how are we going to do that, right? Let's look at app.js, and this is a case of lifting state. Okay, so the idea is the counter component has state in it, right? It contains some state, but we need to share that state with the app component. So that it needs to be shared with another component. And in order to do that, we need to lift it out of the child component and put it into the parent component, okay? So even if we had other components here that needed the total, then if that was a sibling to the counter, then we'd have to lift state out of the counter and put it in the parent so the parent could share that state with both of the siblings or both of its children, okay? Okay, so how are we going to do that, right? Well, we're going to have to undo all the work we did here, okay? So sorry, but it's actually not that much work, right? We're going to get rid of use state here, so I don't need that. I'm going to get rid of state here also, because we're going to lift it here, lift it out of this component and put it into app, okay? Next, let's put props.value again. That's what we had originally, okay? So that's the original value. And then this on click right here, I'm just going to just leave this as an empty function for now, because we're going to come back and do something with this later, okay? But we're going to take this out, okay? So now we've simplified this component, and what we're going to do is we're going to move the state into the parent, okay? So the first thing we need to do is import from React, and we're going to get use state, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to store state as, we could store 2 separate counters, right? But let's imagine we have more than one counter that we want to use, right? So we don't know how many counters we're going to have, and we want to have as many as we feel like having, right? And also we might want to have a button that says add a new counter or subtract or delete a counter, right? So what we want to do is store our counter values as an array. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to say const count setCount equals useState, and the value for useState is going to be an array. And I have two counters here with 3 and 7. Let's make two counters with 4 and 8. Okay, how about that, right? And now what I want to do is I want to map the count across my counters, right? So let's delete these counters here. We'll use count.map, and our map function will take in the value, let's just call it val for short, and the index, right? We can just call that I for short. Okay, so here I've got the count. That's 4 and 8 right now. Put some space in there, right? And then this val is going to be 4, and then it'll be 8, right? And then the I will be the index. It'll be 0 when value is 4 and 1 when value is 8, okay? And what we want to do here now inside our map function is we want to return a counter, okay? So let's put that here. So we'll say counter, counter like this. And remember, our counter has a label and a value. I'm actually going to wrap this in the parentheses here, and then that way I can put it on the next line like this, right? Let's just make it a little easier to read, okay? Okay, so now let's set the label. So we'll say label, and maybe our label is going to be counter colon and the index I, right? So now each of our labels will be counter 0, counter 1, and then the value right here will be the value, or val, okay? So the first counter is 4, and the second counter is 8, okay? So that looks pretty good, but now the buttons don't do anything, right? So we need the buttons to do something. So in order to change the value here, we need to call setCount. And actually, this is a special situation too. If you just have a primitive value, like a string or a number, then you can do everything we did before and it's fine, right? In the case of an object or a reference type, an object or an array, those are both reference types, we need to copy the array whenever we change the value. So when we call setCount, we can't just update one of the values in this same array. We need to actually create a new array and copy all the values, right? Not hard to do, but I'll point that out where that's happening, right? So let's do this now. Let's give our counter an extra prop, and this will be the increment prop. And the value for this is going to be a function, okay? And the idea is calling this function is going to increment one of the values in the array, right? And it's going to be the value that's at the index I, okay? So let's do that, right? So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to do, actually, let's put the curly brackets back in there, right? And I'm going to need a couple lines of code here to make this work out well. So let's do this. Let's say const new count. So here is where I'm going to copy the original array. Okay, so I'm going to make a brand new array with the square brackets, and then I'll use the ... and take the old array and put it after the ... So this means, this is the spread operator or the rest operator. It kind of, like in this context, it means copy all the values here and put them into this new array. So now I have a new array, okay, completely new object. Now we can set the value on that object. So I'm going to go to count bracket I and set the value to value plus 1. Okay? So that'll be our new value. And then I can call setCount, and I can set this to the new count. Okay? So 3 steps. Copy the array, set the value, and then set state. Okay? So let's give that a try. Oh, actually, we got to do one more step. So this should be working here, but the increment function is never going to get called because we haven't called it yet. So in order to call this, we're going to go to the counter component and we're going to call the increment function here. So I'll say props.increment like this, okay? And again, we did this in the other video. Let's deconstruct this because our component here is getting a little crowded, right? So let's say const curly brackets equals props, and I have 3 properties that I'm using so far. So one is label, one is value, and one is increment, right? And now with this in place, I can remove the props dot in front of everything, and that will make this a lot nicer to read. Okay, great. So that looks pretty good now. So now we're in place. If you click on this first button right here, it will call the increment method, which is going to call this function right here, and that will update our state. Let's give it a try. Oh, there we go, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? So that seems to be working. So my challenge to you now is to get the decrement button working, okay? So you can follow this as an example, right? And remember, you'll also have to make a change here in counter.js, okay? So good luck with that, and then we'll continue this in the next video. And again, thanks for watching.